There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger said to his father,
Father, I want right now what's coming to me.
So he divided his property between them.
A few days later, this younger son packed all his belongings and took a trip to a distant land. And
where
there
he wasted all his money in wild living. He had spent everything. When a bad famine spread through that whole land, soon he had nothing to eat.
He was hungry and needed money. So he went and got a job with one of the people who lived there. The man sent him to the fields to feed pigs.
He would have been glad to eat what the pigs were eating, but no one gave him a thing. Finally,
When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare?
And here I am starving to death. I'm going back to my father. I'll say to him, 'Father, I've sinned against God. I've sinned before you.
I am no longer worthy to be called your son.
but let me be like one of your hired workers.' So he left and he went to his father. While the son was still a long way off,
While
his
he
father
was
saw him
still a
coming.
long way
He
off,
felt sorry for him.
his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his
So
son,
he ran to
threw
him
his
and
arms
hugged him
around
and kissed
him
him.
and kissed
The
him.
son said, Father, I have sinned against God and have done wrong to you. I am no
I
longer
don't
worthy
deserve
to be called your
son ever again."
But the father said to his
But the
servants,
father wasn't listening. He was calling to the servants, "Quick, bring a clean set of clothes and dress him. Put the family ring on his finger and sandals on his feet."
Get the best calf and prepare it,
Bring the
so we
fattened
can
calf
eat and
and kill
celebrate.
it. Let's have a feast and celebrate.
This son of mine was dead, but has
Son
now
of
come
mine
back
was
to
dead
life.
and has returned to life. He was lost and is found.
He was lost
So the party
and is
began.
found.
Given up for lost
So
and
they
now
began
found.
to celebrate.
And they began to have a wonderful time.
And this series centers around the story that they just paraphrased for us from Luke 15. It's a story that Jesus told. And it's not just the story of a lost son who finds his way home. It's a story about how all of us find our way back to God. This week, we're going to talk about one of the first steps in our path, in our finding our way back to God. And I want you to realize with me, whether you have never come to a place where you've found your way back to God, or if that's something that you did years ago, that this series of messages is important for you. Because when we find our way back to God, it is a life-changing moment, that first time. But when we find our way back to God again and again throughout our life, it's an ongoing, continual, life-giving process. So this morning, whether you've never found God, you don't have a relationship with Him, or maybe you know God, but He's grown distant. Your relationship has grown cold. You've faded back from the Lord, and you need to come back to Him again. I want you to see that this series of messages can have impact in your life. Today I'm going to introduce this first idea, which is an awakening, a realization, waking up to the fact that we have a great desire and a longing. When I say introduce, what I mean is I'm going to introduce these topics over the next 5 weeks, but we're going to have Bible studies taking place on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays of the next 5 weeks where these ideas will be driven home. Those people that paraphrase the story of the lost son for us in that video, you're going to hear from each one of them in those Bible studies how they found their way back to God. How the story of the lost son is their story. They told you the story of the lost son in their own words. In those Bible studies, they'll tell you of their own waywardness and being lost and finding their way back to God. The thing that I want us to first wake up to this morning, the first realization we need to make, is that we're all looking for something. We see this in the story of the younger son, the prodigal son. If you would, we're going to look at Luke 15 and verse 11 and read this passage. Jesus telling the story, and he said, "A certain man had 2 sons," verse 12. "And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portions of goods that falleth to me. And he divided unto them his living. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. And when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in that land, and he began to be in want." Can you identify with that? When your money is just about all gone, that's when a famine arises, right? When you're kind of at the end of the paycheck, that's when you have a major malfunction in your car, right? That's what happened to this younger son. It was when he was just about out of money that the famine came. Verse 15, and he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into the fields to feed swine. Now imagine that Jesus is a Jew speaking to an audience of Jews who aren't allowed to eat pork. A pig would have been the lowest of the animals that they would have wanted to be around. He says he sent him out to feed the swine. And he would have fain have filled his belly with the husks that the swine did eat, and no man gave unto him. And when he came to himself, he said, how many hired servants of my father's have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said unto him, he goes into that speech that he's prepared, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. But the father said to his servant, bring forth the best robe, and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand, and shoes on his feet, and bring hither the fatted calf, and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead, and is alive again. He was lost, and is found. And they began to be merry. This story is the story about a lost son. But the son wasn't just lost, he was searching for something. There was something missing that he was looking for. And I think that we can all identify with this feeling of something being amiss. Something is not where it's supposed to be. Something is empty in us. And we live our lives looking for that something that is missing. We see this in art. We see it in music. There are a couple of really familiar song lyrics that you might be familiar with that say, I still haven't found what I'm looking for. Or looking for love and all the what? Wrong places. Yeah, you know that one. One of my favorite songs that may not be quite as popular is sung by Switchfoot, and they sing, we were meant to live for so much more than this. Have we lost ourselves? Dreaming about providence and whether mice or men have second tries. Maybe we've been living with our eyes half open. Maybe we are bent and broken. We want more than this world's got to offer. In the beginning of this chapter, Luke 15, we see that Jesus, the reason that he's telling these stories is he's been ridiculed because he's eating with sinners. He's hanging around with people whose lives are a mess. The same thing happens again 4 chapters later in Luke 19 when Jesus goes to have dinner with one specific sinner whose life is a mess named Zacchaeus. And when people are asking and saying things about him, why would you go and eat with this sinner? Jesus said, I have come to seek and to save that which is lost. Jesus said, I've come to find those that are searching. I've come to find those that are lost while looking for what they're missing. Well, he said it direct in chapter 19. In chapter 15, he tells 3 stories to illustrate what it is that he's doing. He tells the story of a lost lamb, the story of a lost coin, and the story of a lost son. You and I, we can identify with this idea of a search. But I want you to see in that while God is searching for us, we are lost because of the search that we have been on. Maybe you're not quite resonating with what I'm saying. Let me point out 3 longings that I think we all have, that we probably all can identify with. First of all, we all long for love. Glenn Wolfe holds the record in the United States for the most amounts of marriages. How many times do you think Glenn Wolfe's been married? 29 times. You knew that like really quickly. Just interesting. Is Glenn a buddy of yours? No. Okay, all right. I didn't think he lived locally. Glenn's been married 29 times. And what makes me, what I want to know is, what made Glenn keep going after his 7th marriage failed? Or his 11th marriage failed? Or what made him think, man, number 19, wife number 19 is going to be the one that makes me happy? What made him keep going after 24 failed marriages? What's the thing that makes us keep looking for love? That even after we've been burned and hurt in relationships, we keep looking because we have this longing to be loved. We've got a longing to be loved. We also have a longing for purpose. Think back to when you were a kid. When you may have been as young as 4 or 5. If somebody asked you, what are you going to be when you grow up? You had an answer ready. Just last week, Nicole filled out, or Haven, my daughter, filled out a paper at school, and Nicole saw it hanging there on the wall, and they'd asked her what she wants to be, and right now she wants to be an artist when she grows up. You know, it's interesting that even at that age, when they don't know any concept of paying bills or having to buy food, at that age when they think that you can get anything at the store if you just write on one of those pieces of paper or swipe that piece of plastic, even when they don't have any concept of money and responsibilities, they have this idea of something that they want to do, something that they want to be. Why is that? Why is it that from a very young age, before you knew that you needed a job, you were thinking about what you were going to do? Because from the very beginning, you've had a longing for purpose. You've wanted to accomplish something. We have a longing for love. We have a longing for purpose. We have a longing for meaning. Right about the time that we start thinking about what it is that we're going to be when we grow up, we start asking a question a lot. And as a father of a 4-year-old, I can tell you that this question gets asked a lot. Why? Why are you doing that? Well, why? What are you doing? Why? And those questions of why, they stick with us even to today. And some of you this morning, you're asking why. Why is this happening to me? Why did they do that? Why did she say that? We want there to be a meaning or a reason behind everything. We've all got that longing for love, for purpose, for meaning. We've got desires in our heart that are unmet. There are answers that we haven't found that we're searching for. And hear me when I say this, that this might seem counterintuitive, but it's a good thing that we're searching for answers. Now, not everything that we long for is good for us. Definitely not. But when we long for love and for purpose and for meaning, those are good things because they can lead us to the right thing or the right person. But unfortunately, we often act in desperation. We often go to great extremes looking for what is missing, and often because we are so desperate in our search to find the piece of ourselves that is missing, we end up losing ourselves. We lose ourselves in the search. You see, the problem isn't the desire. The problem isn't necessarily the search. The problem is that we're looking in the wrong place. We see this start to happen to the younger son in the very beginning of the story. Verse 11 tells us there's a man with 2 sons. Verse 12 tells us that the younger one came to the father and said, "Father, give me my portion of the inheritance." Now, in the context of a first century family, this would have been an incredible insult. Because not only should the son wait until the father passes away to get his inheritance, he should stick around until the father grows old and he takes care of his father in his old age. Make sure that he has a comfortable ending to his life, then settle his affairs once he passes away, and then receive. But what he says to the father is, "Dad, I don't want to wait for you to get sick. I don't want to go through that and then get what's coming to me. I want it now." This would have been an incredible insult to the father. It would have been heartbreaking to the father. You and I, if we look closely, I think that we can see some comparisons to our own lives, times that we've broken commitments, whether big or small, because we become convinced what I'm looking for or what I want or what I desire can't be found here, so I'm pulling up stakes and I'm going to go look for it elsewhere. That's immediately what the son does. Verse 12, he asks for the portion. The father gives it to him. Verse 13, and not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country. The younger son, had become convinced that what he was looking for could not be found on his father's farm, that it could only be found in a far-off place. See, the longing in the younger son's heart wasn't the problem. It was the way that he searched for it and the place that he searched for it. We often look for what it is that is missing in our lives in the wrong places. I'll tell you a great story. Kelly told me this story years ago, and I've never forgotten, and I checked with her to make sure it'd be okay to tell this story. Rick and Kelly ate dinner with Kelly's mom, Marjorie, before she passed away years ago. They went to the old mill here in Evansville, and Marjorie ordered crab legs and had the butter with it, After they'd enjoyed the whole meal, Marjorie realized that she was missing her wedding bands. She wore them all the time. They were incredibly special to her. They'd been given to her by her late husband. So they looked around the table. They looked in the reception area. They looked in the bathrooms. They couldn't find it anywhere. Marjorie was beginning to panic. The waitress came and said, What's wrong? And they said, the rings are missing. I can't find them. Marjorie said, it must have been the butter from the crab legs. It must have slipped off of my finger and be on the tray of food that you took back. So the waitress goes back and she can't find it in the tray of food. It's been dumped into the trash. Marjorie was convinced that's where it must be. So Kelly said, can we have your trash? They took 3 bags of garbage from the old mill back to Rick and Kelly's house, spread out a tarp, dumped it all out, combed through it. No ring. Marjorie went home upset, so disappointed that she had lost this special ring. And you guessed it, when she got home, it was there on the counter. She had never taken it to the restaurant. And as frustrated as Rick and Kelly were that they had searched through all of that garbage and it hadn't been there the whole time, there was a great relief that the rings had been found because they held a special place. They couldn't be simply replaced. It was special. When Jesus tells the story, he tells the story about searching for things. He tells us a story about a younger son who is searching in the wrong places. But the point of all 3 stories, the story about the lost lamb and the story about the lost coin, and yes, even the story about the lost son, is that at the end of the story, what was missing is found, and when it is found, there is a celebration. When the woman finds the lost coin, she calls all of her friends together and says, celebrate with me because I have found what I was searching for. When the shepherd finds the lost lamb and brings it back to the fold, he calls the other shepherds together and says, celebrate with me, I have found what I was searching for. And when the son returns home, the father calls the servants and says, bring the best robe, put shoes on his feet and a ring on his finger, and kill the fatted calf. Let's celebrate because my son who was lost is now found. You see, what we learn from these stories is that while we are searching for what is missing, God is searching for us. And he tells us in verses 7 and in verse 10, look at verse 10 with me. He says, likewise I say unto you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner that repents. You know what he's saying? He says, every time that lost thing is found, every time that lost son comes home, every time someone who's been out there looking and searching for what is missing, every time they come home, heaven throws a party and heaven celebrates. And while we may be frustrated at the things that we have searched through and the things that we have combed through looking for what is missing in our lives, God is ready to celebrate when we finally find what it is that we're missing. When we finally find Him. God is saying that while we are searching for what is missing in us, He is searching for us. That because we have been looking for what's missing in our hearts, we've lost ourselves, that He is looking to find us. And friend, what we have to realize is that it is only in God that we can find what is missing, and it's only in God that we are found. You see, the son found out the hard way that what he was searching for was back at home. I say he found out the hard way because it was fun for a short time in the far country. Verse 13 tells us he goes to the far country, and when he had wasted his substance with riotous living. Now, verse 13 doesn't go into detail of what that riotous living looked like, but later on in this chapter, the older brother tattles on the younger brother to the father. And he says he has wasted his inheritance on harlots. He says, Dad, he's been partying. He's been spending that money on prostitutes. You see, that younger son, he had wasted everything. He had poured everything that he had into searching for love and purpose and meaning and things that were empty. He was looking in the wrong place. Verse 14 tells us that a famine arises after he spent everything. So he goes and he joins himself to a citizen of that country. He's feeding the pigs, and he is now so hungry and so desperate that he is tempted to eat what the pigs are eating. He looks at what the pigs are eating. Everybody else is garbage. He looks at that and it starts to look appetizing to him. And that's when something happens. He realizes that he has hit rock bottom. And verse 17, I believe, is one of the most poetic statements. It says, and he came to himself. He came to himself. You see, the only good thing that happened to the younger son on this party of a journey, it wasn't in the city. It wasn't at the parties. It wasn't when his cash was flush and he was spending it on whenever. The best thing that happened to him was in the pig pen when he looked at that food that the pigs were eating and he was tempted to eat it, because in that moment he came to himself. He made a full circle in his search for what was missing in his heart. He realized, I'd be better off back at home. Verse 17 says, when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? Now the son comes to this realization out of absolute desperation. At this point he says, I'd be better off as a slave at my father's house. Even though I've wrecked my life and I've ruined things, it would be better off to be a slave on my father's farm than to continue living like I'm living. So he makes a bet that he'd be better off to go there and live as a slave. And the real incredible thing happens when the son comes home. Because the passage tells us that as the son is making his way home, that the father sees him a far way off. Because the father was looking for him. He was watching for him. And he runs to him. And he embraces him. And he kisses him. He welcomes him home, not as a slave, not as a hired hand, but as a son. He clothes him and he feeds him. And the desperation that got the son to turn back home, to find his way back home, that desperation becomes love and acceptance beyond his imagination, beyond what he could have expected. Friend, you're here today, and I don't know where you're at in your journey. And I don't know if you're in the far country and you are searching hard. Maybe today you find yourself in the pig pen, and you find yourself desperate. I want you to hear that no matter who you are and no matter where you're at, you will find what you're looking for only when you find your way back to God. The son didn't find what he was looking for in the far country. He found it when he came home. And whether you are at rock bottom because you have been searching hard for what it is that's missing in your life, or you have built yourself a great life and you are climbing up the rungs of that ladder only to find that it's empty at the top, whoever you are and wherever you're at, you'll find what you're looking for when you find your way back to God, when you find your way back home. There are many people in this room that their story is a lot like the story of that younger son. They searched hard and fast for what was missing. And they didn't find it in drunkenness. They didn't find it in partying. They didn't find it in relationships. They didn't even find it in the gutter. But when they came home, when they found their way back to God, they found what was missing all along. And I believe that what was true for them and what was true for this son will be true for you. I believe it so fully that I'm willing to make a bet with you this morning. And I'm not a gambling man. I don't make wagers or bets. But I'll make this one because it's not a bet, it's a sure thing. I know that every gambler says that, right? I believe that if you place your faith in Christ, you'll experience an incredible change in your life. I believe that if you make that wager, you'll experience that love and acceptance that the younger son did when he found his way back home. This wager isn't original with me. It's actually one that Blaise Pascal made with his friends. Blaise Pascal was a 17th century mathematician, and he had an incredible intellect. And he grew up knowing about God but not following Him. In the middle of the night, one night, he had this encounter with God. He placed his faith in Him, and it ignited a passion in him to help his friends find their way back to God. So he began challenging his intellectual friends. Make a bet with God. Make a wager. Bet that He loves you. Bet that in spite of your doubt, He loves you with a love that you can't imagine. And Pascal would go on to explain the wager this way. If you're right, you have everything to gain. And if you're wrong, you have nothing to lose. You see, it's a gamble that we can all afford to make. Because we've got everything to gain and nothing to lose. If you do find your way back to God, you'll find the source of unconditional love. You'll find that purpose that you've been searching for. You'll find the meaning in the universe, that it's not random and cold and just a system of events, but rather there is a God behind all of the madness. And if you do find God, there's a huge payoff. I'm going to ask you to make that bet. I'm going to ask you to pray as if God is real. I'm going to ask you to pray as if you could speak to Him like I'm speaking to you. Tuesday is the 1st of September. Let me challenge you to pray every day in September. Just pray. Call to God as if He's real, because He is. And every week I'm going to encourage you to pray a prayer. And the prayer that I'd like for you to pray this first week is, God, if you're real, make yourself real to me and help me see that you are what is missing from my life. You know when something is missing and you can't find it and you say, man, I can't find this. And someone says, where was the last place you saw it? Or where'd you leave it? And you say, if I knew that, it wouldn't be missing. But I can't remember where I had it last. But if you could remember, if you came to believe where it was, if you could picture in your mind where it was, you'd go there. Friend, I'm asking you to bet that in the Father's arms, you'll find what it is that you've been looking for. Because I believe that's the only place that you'll find what you're looking for. You'll only find what's missing in your life when you find your way back to God. It's not at the bottom of the garbage that you're digging through currently. It's back at home. It's not at the top of the ladder that you're climbing. It's not in the next purchase that you make, and it's not in the next person that you'll be with. It's when you find your way back to God that you'll find what you're looking for. Let's bow our heads for a word of prayer.